spoke to Simon Calder, travel editor of The Independent, and Julia Bue-Said, chief executive of Advantage Travel Partnership. And I began by asking Julia how significant the decision was to scrap pre-departure tests for travellers.
It's a very significant step forward, Carole, for the industry. We have gone back a few steps to get ourselves forward again. We didn't have pre-departure tests for a period of time back in the autumn time, but certainly from an industry perspective and for consumers generally, all thinking about wanting to take a break or travel for business, etc., it's an incredibly positive step forward for sure.
Because presumably, Simon, this is getting rid of not just the hassle of making sure that you've got your right tests sorted a couple of days before you come back and the cost of that, but the worry that if you suddenly test positive, you could be stuck when you're due to be back at work or whatever.
Certainly, yes. And I mean, if there's quite a lot of things to unpack here. So first of all, let me start with that aspect. I mean, when I go to the US, which thankfully I'm allowed to do now, I take a pre-departure test, and I don't think much of it. I think, that's understandable. But that's because I'm going out there. When I'm coming back, the last thing I want is to have a pre-departure test exactly in case it turns out to be positive and I immediately become subject to US rules. Now, unfortunately, of course, anytime anybody feels any symptoms, they need to report that and take a test where it doesn't matter where they are in the world. And that will continue. And I think maybe I'm not going to be so kind and amazed by what we've heard earlier on today in the Commons as Julia, in that I think that this is too little too late, most definitely. I mean, the ludicrous thing is that these rules were brought in on successive Saturday nights as a response to the fears of Omicron. We knew the game was up really by the second week in December. The Health Secretary admitted as much. They then took away the red list, which they'd hurriedly introduced and put loads of African countries on, but they left these tests in place. And that was enough to cause massive problems all the way through December into January, upsetting lots of people who had travel plans but were concerned about the testing, adding to the cost and so on. And there appears to be no good reason whatsoever apart from, we put them in, so let's just keep them there. And I'm afraid this is just yet more of the stop-start approach that we have had for the last 22 months, I now make it.
Except that it is presumably a recognition of the fact that Omicron is spreading pretty rapidly, pretty much all around the world. So it seems pointless to try and prevent it coming into the country. Julia?
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, what Simon says is absolutely right. I mean, we could argue it's too little too late. It's, stop-start, and absolutely has been stop-start. When I look at my members, however, and I look at last week's trading, 50% down, over Christmas, 80% down. These are significant numbers. These are small business owners trying to make a living, trying to trade. So today's news, for me, is not a recognition that the government have done the right thing per se. The government have done the right thing for the industry today and for travellers. And actually, it gives us the opportunity to help travellers on their journey, but also help the industry recover. So I think it's worth thinking about it. From our perspective, that's how we are thinking about it, and really thinking about it in a positive perspective to allow people to book with confidence.
I hate to be the voice of doom, if you don't mind me popping in here, but for how long, Julia? Because, if you go back to August, 24th of August, the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, says, it's great, we're opening up travel. That was the day, of course, that the day 2 PCR test was downgraded to a lateral flow, much cheaper, much quicker, all round easier. And he said, we're gradually opening up, aren't we great? And then 5 weeks later, they're closing down. 6 weeks later, they're closing down even more and making things even tougher than they were in the summer. And unfortunately, this was because a variant pops up. As we know, we're up to Omicron. So what have we got? We've got Pi, Sigma, whatever the rest of them
We
are.
won't test you on the Greek alphabet too hard, Simon.
Just as well, but all the way to Omega, we've got them coming down the track, and there is exactly nothing to signify that the government thinks that they won't do exactly the same thing again. And when I said it was too little, too late, it was certainly too late. I think too little because most other countries are now saying, look, if you're fully vaccinated and maybe even boosted, that's becoming more and more of a stipulation, then we're happy to let you in without any testing. And to have this horrible passenger locator form and have to send yet more money towards testing firms, half of which are, I'm afraid, just get-rich-quick schemes, is annoying. And I imagine Julia's lovely customers puts them off, not least because a family of four, that's going to be probably an extra £100.
Yeah, there are still a lot of other rules in place, aren't there, Julia? And what about this problem of so many different countries now requiring different tests or proof of vaccination, or indeed crucial countries like France, usually an incredibly popular destination, especially for skiing and so on, which are effectively closed to most British tourists still?
Yeah, it's incredibly complicated, and that we can't disagree with that. I think what I do know and what I can speak with authority on is the travel agents that are part of my network. They are there to really help customers and handhold them to make sure they understand the rules. And this is the absolute right time when people should be engaged with professionals to help them through it, because it's exceptionally complex. You don't want to be left on your own. I think just going back to the point Simon made, I think what we absolutely do need now, because we can't keep stopping and starting, whether that's domestically or from an international roadmap, we need a proper roadmap out of this now, a proper roadmap to deal with variants. I'm not a health expert, I'm only a travel one, but we do need a plan to enable us to be able to ensure that we can continue operating in a manner that supports public health, but not at the expense of the travel industry and also consumers as well.
Simon, when we last spoke before Christmas, you were saying that you were so frustrated and exasperated by the complex rules and testing requirements that you'd almost given up travelling, which for somebody like yourself, who is probably the most intrepid traveller that many of us have ever met or heard of, is quite something. Will this change and the other relaxations in the rules be enough to try and tempt you overseas again?
Oh, certainly, yes, because suddenly I'm probably about 70 or 80 quid better off than I would have been in terms of the cost of the test. It's also a lot less onerous. I haven't got to run around while I am in my destination trying to find a suitable test. So, yes, it's inspired me to travel, but the trouble is, the obvious place that I would love to go to is France. And, I mean, Emmanuel Macron has looked at what Boris Johnson's been doing and said, hold my Kronenberg, because I'm going to do exactly what you've done, only worse. This travel ban is totally mad. We've had, a third of a million new cases in France. So to keep the Brits out looks absolutely ludicrous. Anybody would think there was a presidential election coming along in France. I mean, most certainly, and I don't know if Julia would agree with this, but an awful lot of the decisions on quarantine and testing and everything were done because not the scientific data said they were a good idea. The polling data did. This is in this country. So it's horrible the way that international travel has become such a kind of political pawn on top of everything else. And I'm just surprised that the French tourist industry hasn't reacted like sometimes the French fishermen do and got really, really antsy about it. But they are cheesed off. I think that's the word of the day, isn't it?
I mean, Julia, you would, looking at the fact that France has got 300,000 of its own cases of Omicron, expect that perhaps they might soon realise the futility of trying to keep the infection out of the country and damaging their own tourist business. But this is a time of year when people might normally be starting to think about their February half term and getting away with the family. I'm sure a lot of people will be perhaps hesitating, thinking, well, OK, at least I haven't got to do that pre-departure test, but there is so much uncertainty. What would you say to people in that position right now?
I think I'd go back to what I said before. I mean, it is uncertain, but life is right now. We've all become accustomed to that. When you're thinking about travelling for whatever reason, really think about who they're booking with, because those of us that have travelled, I was in New York a few weeks ago, and actually once you do it, you know it's very straightforward because you have access to all the information and you have an expert by your side. So think about who you book, how you book, make sure you're booking through a travel agent who can offer you complete protection on that trip. Travel is possible. I mean, it really is still possible, and today's news makes it easier, particularly if you're travelling over the next few weeks. You may have to be flexible about the destination you want to travel to, be flexible about the booking options that you're considering, but it's most definitely possible, and everyone should be a lot more confident today than they were yesterday.
Simon, let me just put that point to you. If people are thinking about perhaps escaping the pretty rubbish weather we've had in the UK recently, or looking ahead to half term, what would be your advice? And are there places, destinations that are a reasonably safe bet, or is the whole world really in the same uncertain situation given the rapid spread of Omicron?
OK, well, my advice, and I'm so glad to agree with Julia on this, is go to a proper human travel agent and book a proper package holiday. So, for instance, all the people who were unable to go on their Christmas, New Year ski trips, who booked packages through a travel agent, well, it was a simple matter of going along and saying, well, do you want to postpone it? Do you want to have an alternative holiday, or would you like your cash back straight away? As opposed to all the people who booked everything online independently and they're still scrabbling around trying to get their money back. In terms of destinations, well, I mean, here's one which has done really well in terms of tourism, and that's Mexico, because they basically never had any rules on people coming in. And so that's been a great escape. The Caribbean is obviously very tempting for a lot of people, but they've always had sort of quite tough PCR rules and tests on arrival and so on. I mean, at this time of year, there is few better places that you can get to easily than the Canaries of Spain. Rules on mask wearing are very annoying, i.e. whenever you're outside, basically. But things are going to open up, and if you are looking at half term, please don't imagine that things are going to be exactly the same now then as they are now. France will undoubtedly open up, and I believe that as the rest of Europe, the rest of the world accepts that Omicron is here to stay, we might even be able to look forward to going into Australia, somewhere which has kept us out. And, the world will open up in 2022. I need to say I've been completely over-optimistic all the way through the horrible COVID crisis, so please take that with a pinch of salt.
Well, that was Simon Calder, travel editor of The Independent, and Julia Bue-Said, chief executive of Advantage Travel Partnership, speaking to me just a little earlier here on Times Radio.